So it appears that we are all assembled, huh? And I like to do quiet. This is our contemplative kind of atmosphere. I think for retreating it's important, but even when we're together, we can still be contemplative, quiet. And I think we were just talking a little bit before too, maybe we can keep this space in the chapel as kind of a more quiet place. Nothing against conversations. They're ordinary, right? But maybe keep this place more quiet, and also probably the community room in there too, just kind of keep these quarters a little more quiet. And then of course I would encourage you, probably, I live alone now too, our own cells or our own rooms are also kind of important places. Maybe today, I don't know what you all over media, maybe no TV, I don't know how you would do it, but maybe set it up a little more of a contemplative place during these days of retreat. Just want to encourage that as a way of kind of entering into the graces of this moment. I was just going to continue a little bit from last night. I kind of introduced the idea of the spirituality of Nazareth, but I want to give just a little bit more background of what I'm doing with this. Partly it came from Sister Mary, conversation with myself when we were kind of getting ready for this. Some of your input, I believe, too, went into this. I was also given a couple video things where your sisters and sisters groups that you're all kind of affiliated with gave some presentations. Some of that was a little heavier, I think. So this may not be so heavy, and I would say probably I do a little bit of rambling. So if it's rambling, I don't know, ramble with me, I guess, different kind of reflections. I decided to kind of focus on these evangelical councils since I don't live them, right? I'm a diocesan priest, but I'm impressed by the religious orders that make vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. That must be an extraordinary way to live the gospel. Well, in some way it is, isn't it? But it really is the call for everybody. Myself as a diocesan priest, I take a promise of obedience to my bishop. I take also a promise of celibacy to live that state in my life as a priest and minister in the church. And although I don't take a vow of poverty, every Christian should be challenged to be a person of poverty. But sometimes in the religious communities like your own, the different ones that you're part of, I guess you come from different religious communities too, but they almost always have a way that poverty is built right in there as part of the experience of living our life as followers of Jesus. So I will be doing kind of a daily presentation of each one of those starting tomorrow of poverty, chastity, and obedience is kind of what I might call it now ordinary foundations of your life as religious people. They're ordinary to you. But to the outside world, they look rather extraordinary. But don't get caught up on the big deal about it because they're an ordinary way of living our lives rooted in the gospel. Every follower of Jesus is trying to call to implement them in their own lives, so maybe that's what our own lives can point to help others be invited into and attracted to that. One of the things that Brother Charles St. David called, he would say, what stronger way of showing God's love by imitating love? And that's what we try to do even in these vows. So I can present these even though I'm not vowed. They're really for every follower of Jesus, like I mentioned. The idea of celibacy and obedience are offered or presented by myself to my bishop when I'm ordained as a deacon and then as a priest. And then living a life of poverty, a challenge even for every Christian to see how it has been incorporated into their own lives. And I suppose sometimes these vows or promises, they're not done once and for all, right? They're kind of called to be lived daily. They're probably spoken at extraordinary times. When you made your professions, I'm sure those are important days to you, like my own ordination day is important to me. I would call that kind of high time in our lives. But what's the real challenge is to take that high time, and then to let it be lived out throughout the days and the nitty-gritty and even the challenges that come our way. So that the dailiness of living out these vows is what I would call kind of ordinary way of living our own lives as followers of Jesus. So that's got a little bit of a background. I'll give a little bit of a Bible quote to begin this morning's session kind of called the spirituality of Nazareth. So we're going to dig a little deeper into this concept a little bit. And basically it's from Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, 51 to 52. It says, Jesus went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. So something's happening in this context of this place of Nazareth, huh? And that's what we were kind of saying. It isn't like we're trying to romanticize it, like, wow, that must have been the perfect place. It really wasn't perfect. But it became the place where God entered into our human family. And what a powerful thing that is, the incarnation, that God would join with us. Looking for and responding and praying to our Lord God, Creator, and Father, or Mother, or Redeemer, Savior, however we understand God to be, the life-giving Spirit. We find this relationship we have then with God in this ordinary place where we are at. Not in the extraordinary all the time, although we'll talk about it's important to have those kind of high places, I guess. But that's not where most of our life is lived. I don't think you're always in the, well, for us as priests, I mean, we're not always at the chancery or at the cathedral for high liturgies, but where are we sometimes is maybe in the home of a person dying and where there's most need or a person suffering. So the ordinary things of our lives. In our own time, this is the gift that's been given to us. Why now are we here? Why not 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Well, you could get into that and think I'm born at the wrong time, but that's kind of denying how God created us to be. We're created to be living in this time. Is it ordinary? Well, it's got a lot of ordinariness about it, but we could say, well, it's an extraordinary time too. Look what's happening with our own kind of space adventures or whatever. That's kind of grandiose. Then you look at some of the other things, and we're still doing wars and stuff. That's kind of, is that the ordinary? It's kind of the context of our world, isn't it? We got the high points and we got these kind of dark points. Our histories, our genealogies, our geographies, these are not incidental for us. They're actually the flesh and blood of how God encounters us in our own lives with our experiences and with our own kind of contexts. So we build on what is sometimes called then this place of Nazareth, this foundational place where God enters into the human family, where he enters even into my life. The foundation of this spirituality is kind of rooted in that hidden life. As Jesus grew, it says he grew in wisdom and favor with God. So this was all happening there in this context of whether his understanding of who he was as the Son of God developed or how it came to be, but it was kind of being expressed there in Nazareth as he grew and matured and became aware and developed in this relationship with his Father. And it moved him ultimately to his vocation, which was ultimately, we know, and thank God, that he came among us to redeem our human family so that we know who we are and who God is and how we are responding to God. So in this, Mary's model for this spirituality of Nazareth, and you would have her, any of your own religious communities obviously have her as your patron. So Mary's one to kind of keep looking to as one who journeys with us as a model for spirituality of Nazareth. From kind of a non-important place, she isn't necessarily held up there as like, look at me, I made it, in some kind of grandiose way. But look at me, how I was able to serve and be present to God's calling. So her own family situation, her own religious experiences, particularly her Annunciation, no doubt you pondered that many times in your own lives. That's a mystery of our life. How is it God has announced himself to us? So it's important. How is it we carry that message out? You look at the visitation. This is one of Brother Charles's favorite meditations was the visitation. We take what's in us, but we also share it with others. And not in any big plan or program. She went to help a mother or to a cousin who was indeed also pregnant So it wasn't like, I'm going to get this perfect plan laid out. She found a need and responded. So this idea of waiting and visiting and birthing and nurturing and teaching, they're throughout her life. We don't know the specifics of them, but we know our lives and how is it we have encountered or let God kind of enter into those times of our lives that might be rather ordinary. They're not insignificant. Brother Charles de Foucault is kind of one rooted in the spirituality of Nazareth. He was kind of first, well, he was kind of a playboy actually. If you want to read his whole story, that's probably the exciting part for the world, but it's not the exciting part for Christianity or for our lives as Christians, because he threw that all away and said that was meaningless. I want to be close to Jesus, and Jesus said Nazareth. And he actually then radically, of course, went to try to be a Trappist. It wasn't strict enough, and all these kind of stories about him. But he ends up then living as a hermit in Nazareth. I'm going to do the right thing at the right place, in the, like literally being in Nazareth. But it was that kind of idea of simplicity that took root in him, and it helped him to then even experience this idea of my call is to be kind of presence of Christ wherever I am. And it took him to Algeria and Morocco, all these places of the Muslim world, where he ended up witnessing faith, and from the world standards, very unsuccessful. He flopped. That's a story of success. Well, our world says, well, that would put him off to the end, not important. But he ended up inspiring some 21 different groupings, including this Jesus Caritas fraternity of priests that I'm part of, inspiring us to live a life of simplicity in our own ministry and service to God. 21 different religious communities kind of find their origins around St. Charles de Foucault. Our late Holy Father, Pope Francis, made different references to Brother Charles in a lot of his writings, and even his encyclicals. You might always have a quote or a description of Charles, leaving an impression, even in our time, to say, here is a witness for us. And guess what? This witness looks kind of odd compared to what our own society might set up as this would be the success model. So he gives inspiration for kind of the ordinary. Not a ministry of climbing up and having or attaining power in a system like we got this together, but kind of reaching down and serving the least and whatever systems and circumstances people are in. This is what Brother Charles inspires so many people to do, to be there. The Little Sisters of Jesus, perhaps you've heard of them. Mother Madeline, her cause also up for sainthood is kind of another woman who lived a really radical way. I think, I don't know that I could do something like that. But she inspires people to say, well, look at what's important. And it can happen and be lived out in simple ways. So a spirituality of Nazareth is not really about piety or romanticism or saying, oh, wouldn't that have been nice? And it wouldn't have been easier back then. What it must have been like to have the perfect Son of God living and breathing. Wouldn't that be great? And then we get kind of lost into the what if. And we miss the idea of, well, what about right now? Because the incarnation happens now too. The basis for spirituality of Nazareth is the hiddenness and unrecorded life of Jesus before his public ministry, that there was much happening even in that ordinariness. It's kind of about the ordinary things, the nitty-gritty of being in family, of growing up, doing of chores, having a job. It's about experiences, the challenges living in a primitive place where Nazareth would have been, an out-of-the-way place. It's about living in a Jewish faith family in a place where the government was was dominating them and taxing them. A place in a local synagogue, a place of prayer and development of religious life in a local area in a historical time. It had a connection to family, to relatives, to townspeople. These were not insignificant to the context of how God entered into the human family. That he would even go to the wedding feast, Jesus of Cana, not insignificant. It sounds like an ordinary thing, a wedding, but what happens there is rather extraordinary. Being known, Nazareth, it was known to be an out-of-the-way place. really small, apparently, if you did read readings about that. People kind of conjectured very small and kind of insignificant. But it's knowing then that even in this context, God would choose to enter. A spirituality of Nazareth is going to emphasize Jesus then as one who is with us. Kind of then, I think the idea of Jesus as a brother or as kind of a sibling to us becomes a closer way for us to relate to him rather than, oh, look where he made it. I wonder if I can get there. And like too far away. This notion of Jesus born into an ordinary place gives us kind of hope to see our own place too. So it's not about titles or roles or accomplishments. It's kind of about being kind of present to the moment. The spirituality of Nazareth in this sense is opposed to what is sometimes contrasted to a spirituality of Jerusalem. I have nothing against Jerusalem, but in Jerusalem some big things happen. Monumental things, ultimately, Jesus' death and glorious resurrection. But that is a way of kind of highlighting the highest points of our faith, but that we don't live right there all the time. Even the experience of the resurrection is go out to the world, so you can't stay here. Or even the experience of Tabor, where the transfiguration happened. That would be kind of a high point. That doesn't happen every day, And so we're kind of living, we have those in our own lives. Probably your own vocation, profession, day, maybe significant things in your life, different assignments, kind of the high points. But they're not the whole picture. Nazareth speaks of what might be called a low Christology. This kind of puts it in opposition to a high Christology, like God being the Son of God, or Jesus being the Son of God, emphasized really in St. John's Gospel quite a bit. Like, I'm in charge here, and I'm going to be doing this for the whole human family. But that's more of a figure of power and prestige in this notion of a high Christology that Christ is leading us on, but we're kind of looking there. The other notion is a lower Christology where Jesus is born with us, even with the idea of suffering with and carrying burdens, so that it carries that closer connection to our human dynamic. So this is kind of the thought that a priest in our fraternities from Pakistan, interesting, that's where he's living his faith. Pakistan, I think it's less than 1% of the population in Pakistan is Christian. And then to have him living his life there, but he would say this is what he's called to do. And he wrote a book called The Face of God at Nazareth. And he will spend some time kind of doing this contrasting of a high Christology and a low Christology. And again, probably not trying to compete to say one is necessary and one isn't. But the whole picture and where we live our lives mostly is in our more human day-to-day life. We're not always going to the big assembly or to the big event or the big liturgy. We're living kind of our ordinary lives. So that's kind of the understanding of this spirituality of Nazareth. It will kind of ponder the different realities of, well, what would it be that we're cared for by God? Maybe we're cared for by our community. Maybe we're caretakers in the community. These are how we're living out our faith. Mary protecting Jesus, Joseph kind of providing for Jesus. Where are we fitting into this notion of being cared for, providing for others? Those are kind of reflections for us as we maybe think about this context of Nazareth. The focus of this retreat is based on our reflections and prayer times on Jesus from Nazareth. So we'll have some opportunities to do this in our next days. It will show us how to spend some time in our days to see how our Nazareth, is that a way of saying it? Our Nazareth, I guess right here, who would ever thought this is Nazareth? But imagine it is. This is your place to live faith, where we get a glimpse of something grand, but we also have the ordinary things that happen. So we'll be looking at some of that to allow these ordinary elements of our lives to be a basis and a source of richness for our lives, even where we're at now. I know in my own retirement, I realize that now, probably more reflection time, but I won't feel rushed to the next thing so much either. And so there's a sense of kind of time, more reflection, is more springing up in gratitude. When I was a pastor at St. Patrick's Parish in O'Neill, it's called kind of Irish capital. I guess there's a few of them in Nebraska. They all get a little bit boastful about being Irish. Part of the community were Irish. But anyway, with this, I got kind of reading about some of the Celtic spirituality. Some of you, no doubt, have read it and being part of it. You still pray in this way too. The Celtic spirituality is very incarnational and kind of ordinary. There's a beautiful part of that there are prayers for the beginning of the day, and even dressing. So you put on not the vestments of a high liturgy, but you're putting on your clothing for the day. Lord, help these shoes lead me to where I need to go. Let this shirt I put on be a place of giving me shield from anything harmful. You see how just the ordinary things become kind of an inspiration even for how we will live our faith. Not in a grand way, but kind of in the ordinary. My Jerusalem experience, I'm just going to talk about my Nazareth experience, I'll talk about Jerusalem experience, maybe just to get you thinking a little bit about that in your own lives too. My Nazareth experience is this. I was born in Butte, Nebraska. Now people say, well, you're not Montana. No, that's not even a big place. Butte is like, well, about 300 people now, I think. And then on a farm outside of Butte, 5 miles. So quite remote when you think about it. And then I was born in a smaller town than that. But there were women religious there. The missionary Benedictines were there in a hospital. So they were there in an out-of-the-way place. For something ordinary they were part of, bringing life to communities in these kind of out-of-the-way places. So this place of Butte was considered, I found out later in life, kind of the backwards place. I've been growing up, how do you know it's backwards or not? But I realized pretty soon it was. And the folks there probably not as socially inept or adept, they're more inept probably, in relating to bigger places. We were intimidated by the talk of cities. Even now, my younger brother will not want to drive in Omaha, period. People there are crazy. Well, we live here, come on, Not everybody is crazy, but there's a part about this can be intimidating. But this idea of Butte in the diocese, for instance, as a priest, it was kind of the place that people would say, and here I'd be sitting there, and they say, well, I hope we don't get sent to Butte with my assignment. And I'm thinking, yes, what's wrong with Butte? But anyway, that was the idea that would be the worst place to be. Something insignificant, something not really counting or being important. So it was kind of a little bit of a sting. But rooting myself in that spirituality of Nazareth, I like to think of myself as something that helped me, actually. To see myself as not that important. And doesn't mean, I suppose I did have a little bit of a self-esteem issue that I had to kind of work with throughout my life. But this idea of my first experience of being a part of the church, I was ordained a deacon, and the way it worked out, I wasn't ordained here in Omaha with other classmates, but I was ordained in Butte, in my home parish. And that's left an impression, because then the diaconate, what's that about except service to the people? So I think that's a rootedness in my own foundation that I find is a great gift that has come to me kind of in that place where I was able to be ordained a deacon. When I was ordained a priest at the cathedral in 1980, whoa, it was here, a big cathedral. Quite a few of my relatives didn't come. It's too far away. They figured, you'll do something back in Butte, won't you? And so, yeah. But this idea of kind of there, that place and the experience at the cathedral, certainly a different feel about how it is God's present to us. Can be in an ordinary, but it can also be in these bigger, extraordinary places. There's a priest, part of the fraternity, Jesus Caritas, he's resting in God's embrace right now, Mariano Puga from Chile. He was called and raised up in this whole thing. The fraternity of Jesus Caritas is not very organized. One of the great things that Brother Charles, if you remember, was he was a failure at organizing a religious community. He had a great rule, but no one could follow it. But Mariano Puga ended up being surfaced up as the leader of the Jesus Caritas fraternity as a priest. And wouldn't you know, the title was called the General, Religious General or something like that. What was it called? You remember religious priest, Mother Superior? These are pretty highfalutin sounds, aren't they? So he said, I'm going to be called the International Responsible. I didn't want that word general associated with him at all, because obviously he's from Chile and he had a history there, or there's a history there, of General Pinochet tragedy and how he lived out his power, So Mariano Puga was really resisting that, even the title of empowerment, you might say. So almost seeking a lower place, being responsible to help and to assist others. Well, I could say, I suppose, then, that my own Jerusalem experience put me in a context of relationship to a whole body of believers in the life of the church. So there is that part of a Jerusalem experience that's big. Your religious communities probably all have headquarters where? Rome? Do they have connections? Not so much? France, okay. So this idea is sometimes we have other places. My ordination as a priest at the cathedral is kind of a Jerusalem experience for me, I would say. Even my title is Reverend Father. Okay, go with that. Pastor, Dean, these are all kind of titles. They kind of suggest something of a power and influence. One of my great ministry parts was to be a servant minister to the priests of the Archdiocese. Does that sound like a power place? Not really. If I was the vicar general for the clergy, yeah. But servant minister was different. He was more relational to the priests in their own needs. But these titles and roles speak of kind of a prestige or a privilege, or they can. They're not bad in themselves, but they can lead kind of to a denial of where did God's call come to me? Who am I really as a child of God? Regardless of what achievements I might make, or what I've done, or what have come my way, what is it that best kind of says God came to me in the ordinary? So maybe reflection today could be this notion then on my Nazareth. It isn't for you to feel pity for me, or even to feel pity for yourselves, like, oh man, I don't want to go back and think about how I began, because maybe there is some kind of sadness there, but it's not insignificant. I think the point is to kind of reflect on where does it come from, so that we can kind of realize there is a context of humility that God works there, in that environment, in that ordinary place where God chooses to enter into. It's a normal context for our spiritual life. So I think that's kind of my presentation here today. There is a little bit of a worksheet that's available as you leave today. It's called Seeds for Prayer. And again, you can use it as you want to. There's a pondering with Mary, a little bit of pondering of a quote from St. Charles David Paul. Then I did set up a little thing about virtues and vices. I don't know where this comes from, maybe from a classical understanding, but the virtue around this idea of Nazareth, what is it that's kind of revealed that can be helpful? And what's a vice? Maybe this idea, I already hinted at it. If I think only about Nazareth, I might think everybody or myself being inferior, or it might be kind of a place of anger, like, why did I end up there and not somewhere else, or pride, at least I didn't go there. You know, it can build up negative things too. So that might help a little bit as you're looking at on Thursday, we're going to be celebrating reconciliation, how it is that God wants to bring healing to wherever our place is. So that's kind of where that's in there. You might reflect on that a little bit. And in kind of the praying and reflecting over kind of ordinary context of our own time. We are living in I will call it a strange time, but I'm sure probably my folks would have said, well, ours was stranger. We live in our time. What is it like? And what are the ordinary things that come our way? And how is it we can witness our faith in these ordinary times? And then just one last part of this worksheet, or not even, the worksheet sounds pretty business, doesn't it? For Seeds of Prayer, if those don't even trigger anything, I might just encourage using Lexio for the gospel of today. And there's just a little method there you can do that if you'd rather just go to the scriptures, because we will be having them at the Mass today too. This week we're reading mostly from Matthew, his account expanding on the Beatitudes, this whole central teaching of the kingdom of God. So those will be there. And then we'll have a feast day in there too, but the birth of John the Baptist, but most of our readings will be reflecting on Matthew. So with that in mind, I think we'll just send you off here then in your own kind of quiet place or time of reflection. And those who wish, I guess we're looking to gather as kind of optional time this afternoon at 2 o'clock. And that will be out in this other commons area, is that what you're calling it? Community room. For those that want to be part of that, kind of an area of spirituality, of creativity, but that'll be this afternoon at 2. So thank you.